To content integrity and AI, and this is a nice follow-up to the session we just had. We'll also be talking about provenance. We'll be talking about the ethics of using AI in journalism. My name is Christine Mohan, and I come from a media background, 11 years at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal on the web ops side. Before that, I was at a software startup called Buzz. It was acquired by the New York Times Company. And then about 10 years ago, I was at one of the first decentralized media platforms called Civil Media, funded by Consensus. The goal was to really open up newsrooms and the ability to own your own content and monetize it, and also have community governance to kind of make sure the quality, the ethics of the journalism was continued. So very briefly, we will go through quick intros and then dive into it. So Waffa and I were speaking last night, great session. She is a veteran journalist and AI innovation specialist with more than 15 years of experience, including a decade at Deutsche Welle. She's currently pursuing a master's in cyber psychology, so the full gamut. And here we have Justin, who is an independent AI researcher and former CTO and co-founder of Vision Lab. He co-founded the Open History Project, which won the German Journalistic Engagement Prize, and he currently leads the AI Salon Berlin. So we're definitely going to talk a little bit more about the Open History Project. And we have Liam Kelly here, DeFi correspondent at DL News, which covers responsible news and analysis on cryptocurrency and DeFi. So we've got journalistic side, business side, research side. So to kick it off, why don't we start with using AI and how it can enhance rather than replace journalistic work. Love to talk a little bit about what you've seen so far, anything that's concerning you, and any advice you'd have in terms of both the consumer who's taking in the information and what to look for. Waffa, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me yesterday and today. I feel a little bit under pressure today, knowing that not so many journalists are in the room. So I will try to take the pressure away, and please come and ask me any questions. I'm here to try to also help in finding solutions for the journalism world. So talking about AI and the good uses of AI in journalism. I tend to be a very cautiously optimistic about the use of especially generative AI in journalism. There are other tools, of course, that journalists, especially in investigative journalism, have been using since many, many years before the hype. So now it's getting more evolved and faster. But there are definitely good uses of even generative AI. So yesterday I gave a workshop, and I was telling the participants that about two examples. One example, the two examples are connected to deepfakes. So deepfakes are one of the biggest problems of our times now in journalism. It makes it harder to verify content. It just distributes big time to the spread of misinformation and disinformation. But some journalists are clever enough to use deepfakes towards protecting their sources. So in the French television, there was this documentary that talks about the Iranian young people, and they wanted to protect their sources, so they created a complete characters out of deepfakes, and they integrated that into the documentary, and with this they could tell a compelling story to people, a visual story, but in the same time they protected their sources. Another example is in Venezuela. Some news anchors are having fear to tell the news on video, not to be pursued, and in the same dynamics, they use also avatars to anchor the news, which protected the journalists themselves from being exposed to some oppressive regimes. So we can use the tools to our protection, but we also need to think we already created these avatars now, giving it some give the machine some information. What will happen to this information? And sometimes also it's very sensitive information that we cannot give it, given also the text that we are giving to the news anchors to say and it makes it very tough later to correct or revisit this content in case we needed that.
That's a really interesting use case. Last night we were speaking about covering the news in difficult countries, which are pretty much all the countries right now, including US, but Venezuela, Mexico, and so I think that's a fascinating use of AI that I hadn't really heard a lot about. We're used to, in the crypto world, the avatars and the faces on the website, so it's great to hear about that. And also, I'm sure in the future there'll be things like digital identity, and last night I think Karen spoke about ZK proofs, and so being able to prove that you are that journalist without proving the identity of who you are. So I think there's quite a few kind of blockchain-based tools that we could use here for the safety of the journalists going forward. And actually, I'd like to hear from you. What tools are you using? What have you tested? Basically, what's working for you, Liam? And also, what are you concerned about as a journalist in terms of what you're seeing up from maybe peers and colleagues who are maybe cutting corners?
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for sharing this panel with you guys as well. So in terms of things that kind of I've tried, I'm a big believer in sort of traditional tools and how they can kind of be augmented by things like AI. So a good example is like FOIA requests, which can be really kind of taxing, and you have to be very specific in the kind of words you're using when you're kind of get these documents. And so right now I'm kind of doing this project where I'm basically asking all of the 50 states in the US for who's basically applied for a banking charter. Because there's this idea going around that lots of stablecoin providers, crypto companies are filing en masse for banking charters, which is a super interesting story. But to try and get every state's sort of response on that, or every sort of financial department within each of these states that's kind of receiving these, it would take a ton of work to get those FOIA requests done. And so basically what I've been able to do is
Can you explain what a FOIA request is?
Oh, yeah. Freedom of Information Act. So like you can basically ask any government agency to give you certain information that's basically public record, and they're sort of obliged to provide that. Given your request is written appropriately, sent to the right person, that kind of thing. So it's quite pedantic, but once you've kind of harnessed like the language, who it needs to go to, you can kind of scale the request, right, using certain sort of AI tools where you can get it rewritten a bunch of different times, sent to the right person each time, and then you kind of have a pretty quick interaction with a person on the other side who's kind of seen your filing, seen your request, and then from there you can kind of take it as just a person-to-person kind of interaction, because that's basically what you're looking for. You want to be with a person, speaking with a person, and you can kind of cut through a lot of that sort of thing. So that's one of the ways that I've been using it. I think in terms of some of the ways that I've seen that maybe is not necessarily appropriate is anytime AI is interacting directly with content that a reader is seeing. I think this is maybe the red line, personally, where I think that you shouldn't really be using AI in that sense. I think at the end of the day, you're a writer, right? And like you are the person that's providing the information. You want to be completely in control of like how the information is presented to your readers, especially in a journalistic sense, because not just because things could be incorrect, but the meaning of terms maybe is not necessarily understood by a machine in the same way as like a reader gathering information, especially critical information. So I think don't offload all of your journalistic tools just yet. I think writing and reporting, this is sort of where you need to stay as like a human entity in the system that is journalism and readership, I suppose.
So, nice segue into a question for Justin. What does healthy collaboration look like between a human and AI in content creation? I mean, we can kind of extend this beyond the journalism, and many of us are content creators in more ways than one, and we're all creating our own content on our different social media channels. So where is that collaboration most healthy?
Sure. Thanks, Christina, and thanks for everyone else on the panel. So, question about what's healthy with content collaboration with AI. I think we're all still learning, at least I'm learning a lot here about what that means for journalism and what it means for our society. I think coming from sort of cognitive science or the AI salon, like what's good for society view, I can kind of present the intuitions that I've come across that make sense to me, and it's a lot about we don't want to give up too much agency to these tools. So it might be that we're used to riding bicycles and we rely on bicycles to get to work or the public infrastructure. But there's some points where we want to be able to still maintain autonomy. And I think especially with content creation, to be aware how are people likely to be affected if we scale up this kind of capability? I think that's an important question to ask as a society. Coming from the business background, scaling is everything, so you want to scale as much as possible. And then when you look at the societal, you look at the individual. So how is the individual affected? And I think increasing awareness maybe about tools for basically how aware can people be of how they're affected by their media sources is one thing, so the very personal. And the second is the systemic. How does the system that we are part of, how does it shape our beliefs? How does it shape our potential perspectives and our ability to be what we want to be? Very general. Thank you.
And just to follow up, Justin, could you speak a bit about the Open History Project? We heard from panelists earlier today on the challenges of permanence and provenance and having a lasting content on the web. And so I'm wondering what your project was all about.
I've heard today about this, the importance of link rot, and I feel ashamed that my website is now link rotting away, available somewhere in Internet Archives, hopefully still. But it was a project I co-founded, where collecting stories from people with a very zealous ambition to be the Wikipedia of experiences. I hope somebody takes that on, because I think it's still a beautiful idea to preserve individual voices regarding historical events. So yeah, it's basically like an oral history project. And yeah, with technology, you can see like having a few years since it's been sort of the website was discontinued, that realizing how valuable it would still be if there was a place in the web where all these stories still were maintained and accessible. And on the other hand, I've started to think about reflecting how has my voice then changed over time? How is my role and how would I want to be identified with changed? And do I want to always be identified with something I did 5-10 years ago? So I only can just kind of surface the experiences that I've come across on that point. Thanks.
And Liam, a follow-up for you. You were talking about kind of the boundaries, but where do you think in terms of journalism and fact-checking or news collection, news gathering, sourcing, where would you draw that line between human and then AI-assisted?
Yeah, so I think like everyone here, you've tried AI for something and it's given weird results, and so you've kind of like almost taken 2 steps back. And to a certain extent, like I feel like I've kind of gotten back to just calling people on the phone. You have your trusted sources, you know the people that are providing this like information, they know where to kind of lead you and that sort of thing. And I think to a certain extent with the proliferation of AI, I've gone like, yeah, almost, I wouldn't say I'm writing letters to sources these days, but I think in terms of news collection, I'm relying a lot more on just like human-to-human interaction rather than sourcing Google or going to AI and say, hey, what were the biggest stories today? I'd rather get that from basically somebody that I know and I've met and I trust, which doesn't seem very like technologically advanced, but I think in this day and age, it remains to be like one of the core features of journalism that doesn't seem to be under threat necessarily by AI. People are at the core of every story, and I think keeping that like kind of front and center whenever you're adopting any kind of technology is crucial, and none more so I think than in journalism. So it's all about the people, and maybe the machines can help you get closer to certain people, but you should just kind of keep it in that sort of lane, I suppose. I think that answers the question somewhat.
And Waffa, on the more positive side, how can AI actually, could you talk a little bit about news and avoidance and how you could kind of improve or at least engage an audience more so with AI potentially?
I'm not sure if it will be very positive. I mean, I hope, as I started talking about the positive uses of AI in journalism, but building on what just the fellow panelists here said, it seems very overwhelming at the moment, not only for journalists in newsrooms to deal with AI tools, but also for the audiences. So there are academic research that says any content that is labeled that it has been created partially or fully with the use of AI, it gets less engagement than the content that is created fully by human. And we, in newsrooms, we are in this dilemma whether we disclose that we use AI and at which level and in which process. So should we disclose if we just generate content, images, video, or we can only disclose if we cannot disclose if we're just using it in the background. What worries me the most, and I'm wearing the cyber psychology hat at the moment, is how we talk about content integrity in general, because for me, this is kind of a life cycle of content, starting from being very intentional, researching the story and building or structuring your story up to distributing the story. And the worrying thing at the moment is that we still use the tools that became traditional to us to distribute the content, and we of course, many of the good journalists and the good independent media houses, they are trying to be intentional as most as possible and put the audience at the center, but we don't follow up what's happening afterwards. And I just have a feeling that we are moving from the attention economy towards the emotions economy. And it's becoming more of like, we need more engagement, but we don't really understand what is the other side of engagement. And people think the other side of engagement is disengagement. This is not true, in my opinion. The other side of engagement is addiction, or is news avoidance, or is mistrust or distrust in the news. So we are in a huge dilemma, and AI is actually amplifying these issues. It's not solving it. It solves some problems, but it's not really helping.
That is a great point there. Just checking on time if Ariki is here. Do we have time for one more, or should we? One more, okay. Let's flip to the business side, business models. In terms of economic incentives and how, what does AI mean for the business side, and using more and more AI and less humans and writers and reporters? Is it going to be something that, newsrooms are down to the bare bone right now as it is, and so I'm sure layoffs. We were talking last night, 10,000 news creators fired in the last 3 years. So is that going to escalate, and where's that mix?
Wow, yeah, that's a great big question. I'm not sure that I have insight on the journalistic industry specifically, how they're being affected. So I guess it's similar to every other field, I can imagine. And I think conversations like this, where we can also make incentives more clear, are positive. So we can make people's incentives more clear. It's going to lead to a more aligned society. That's one idea. And yeah, I don't know that I have any more insight on it. I think I'm looking forward to what we can do together, and yeah, maybe we can figure this out. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I can add something to this, being in the newsroom for 15 years. So I'm doing also my thesis now on how journalists feel about the use of generative AI, and just merely feelings. And I came across this idea of like, it's not me, it's AI. And journalists are feeling they are competing with the AI tools at the moment to prove that their worthiness of doing the content. Some are very optimistic, and the use of AI, for example, in news summaries yesterday, I completely changed my idea. I was like, non-news summaries that, especially using generative AI, that can go so wrong. Yesterday, I saw some UX design, great, amazing UX design in some experiments, and they changed my idea completely about it. So there are great uses, but I doubt that we are going to use it in field reporting. I wouldn't endorse this, but using it in the post-production, maybe that would help the most.
Wonderful. Let's end on that positive note. Thank you very much, everyone. And that concludes the panel. Thanks very much.
Which one's yours? Okay. Okay. That was an amazing panel.